If you're watching this video, I'm going to guess it's because you like reading and you've been reading, but you've been struggling to stay focused and it's taking you longer than you would like to get through a book, or you just simply don't remember as much of it at the end as you would like, or you're just not getting as much out of it as you would have hoped for. Or reading is just something you'd like to start to do. And fair enough, the truth is that reading can be difficult. It's hard enough for us to simply pick up a book to begin with, and then even harder to make our way through that book. But it is worth doing. And there are ways that we can make reading easier and as productive as possible through both process and mindset, particularly in the attention deficit landscape of 2025. Now, this isn't a video that's going to tell you how to read as many pages as quickly as possible or how to hack your brain so that you remember everything. I don't think those kinds of things work for most people anyway. What I am going to do is walk you through how to read a book so that you actually get the most out of it, being as realistic as possible. I'm Lucian McCaig, and this is Rigorous Wisdom. Reading is both predictable and inconvenient in that it dares do the same thing as everything else in life. It takes up our time. Precious time that we've already got allocated to a million other things that each scream at us why they're more important than that daunting brick of paper before you. And this tempts us to do what we always do when squeezed into a tight space, to cut corners or to cheat. It probably doesn't help either that now so many of our daily tasks are micro and quick, checking emails, scrolling through social media, shooting off a quick texts, etc., etc. And what happens is that we tend to treat books in the same way as these tasks, something to be hurriedly engaged with and then put away. But the truth is this: reading doesn't work when you treat it as a 5-minute activity to fill in the space between other things. And there's a particular reason why this is the case, and that is learning is often about building a narrative of understanding in your mind. And reading in short bursts makes that narrative too fragmented. Our mind can't grasp onto it properly. If I open a book and only read a few paragraphs at a time, there's a very good chance that I'm going to immediately forget those paragraphs as soon as I put the book down. Your mind needs time to settle into the themes of what you're reading, to connect the words on the paper to the tendrils of knowledge and narrative that you already have so that you can consolidate them. You need time to remember what you already know and then time to build on what you know. And if you just jump in and then jump back out again straight away, you just leave it all behind. And if you read like this, taking 5 minutes here and there on the bus between tasks at work, you might get through a chapter, but once you're done with that chapter, you'll realize you can't remember anything about it whatsoever. In truth, most of us need about 20 to 30 minutes in one go, in one sitting, to read productively. This amount of time allows you to subliminally reconcile what it is you already know with what it is that you're reading, and to do enough work to actually imprint those ideas, those new ideas, into your system. It's like exercise. You can't just go to the gym, do a single set of bicep curls, and suddenly expect to have bulging arms at the end of it. You need to give your brain a proper workout. And on this note, just like the gym, it's probably a good idea to keep your intervals between reading sessions relatively short. Try not to go a week or longer between reading sessions so that you don't lose budding knowledge while it's forming. Now, there's something important here to consider that I've never really heard anyone else talk about in this space, and probably because it's not just a quick, simple fix. And it's this: you actually need a reason behind why you're reading. We tend to think that learning things, that doing things, can be reduced to simply an order of operations, but that's not how this works. Our brains operate via a reward and motivation system that encourage us to do things depending on the intrinsic value proposition that they have or that they provide. For example, that system encourages us to search for food when we're hungry because of the value of the nutrition that it provides. It inclines us towards romantic relationships because of the comfort, security, and potential for reproductive success that entails. For our brain to encourage us to pick up a book and then expend the mental effort necessary to read it, it needs a reason to do so. And those reasons usually come in the forms of goals that you have articulated. And these goals could be to become more learned on a particular topic because it's important to you for whatever reason. Perhaps there are conversations that you want to be better prepared for. Perhaps you want to write your own book or essays. Or maybe you just want to be someone that is educated and understands the world better. And perhaps you just want a hobby to occupy your time and enjoy the process of reading for its own sake. Whatever it is, the articulation of a goal or a reason provides us with the motivation we actually need to undertake the process of reading. And when it comes to learning itself, there is ample research now suggesting that when we are motivated towards learning a thing, rather than just for, say, learning it because we have to, but we have a real reason, there's a real value proposition behind that learning, we actually learn that thing better. Our brains become more plastic, allowing us to generate new neural circuits and encode that information more quickly and productively. If you want the best chance at being able to pick up a book, to pass through its pages and absorb its contents, you need a sense of why you're doing that is compelling and important. You can just force yourself to read, but that'd be like working against the grain. What you want is a narrative of why picking up that book and going through its pages is a good thing to do. So as I was just saying, you need to have a reason behind why you're reading to have the best shot then at reading. I'll use myself as an example here. I am particularly interested in the human condition, in why we are the way we are and why we do the things that we do, particularly at the level of the individual and the individual mind. So in a sense, that's my broad goal and the foundations for the narrative that I would like to construct. What this means is that I'm generally interested in books within the realms of psychology, neuroscience, philosophy and spirituality, biology, and perhaps veering into the self-help space as well. Now, what I've done there is I've limited myself. I have, in some sense, specialized. I might veer off here and there into something like physics or something more biographical, but I generally contain myself to things that I know I want to read, that I have a particular reason to read. And that also helps with the construction of the narrative that I talked about in the last section. Now, this is just something to keep in mind. Sticking to a niche or category at a time can help you feel more directed and purposeful in your reading and your outcomes, rather than just trying to absorb any number of random things and then getting frustrated when you don't find yourself able to. Now, I don't know about you, but I often find non-fiction books a little daunting. They're often big, bulky, and come with the promise of much time lost to their consumption. And so it's easy to think, well, there's no way I'm ever going to get through this thing, so why start it at all? But this reveals a common misconception that we have about books, that we have to read the whole thing. It's easy to think that if we don't read every single page, we won't have done the book and the author justice, or we'll miss something, or we simply won't have done it properly. We can't say to ourselves that we've actually read that book. But this is just not true. To be honest, I rarely read a book all the way through anymore. Firstly, I'm just finding it harder to read than I once did, and I'm also struggling to find the time. I'm also not a particularly fast reader, I don't think. It's not like I'm slow, but I'm not a racehorse either. And the fact is there are so many books out there to read. I don't want to be stuck on one of them forever. I don't want to spend months reading the same thing, and I don't have to. And neither do you either. What I tend to do instead is pick chapters that I know I want to read and start with them. For example, I was reading Look Again by Tali Sharot and Cass R. Sunstein recently, which is a book on habituation and breaking normalization. I know that I wanted to read part 1 on well-being, and I also know that I next most wanted to read part 5 on society, with both tyranny and progress as the subsections of that. And so I read those things and then found my attention waning and I moved on. Likewise, if you're halfway through a book and find yourself losing interest, either put it down for a while or just move on. Find the next thing. There's no point forcing yourself to try and read something that you don't want to. Just take a moment to reflect on what you did learn and if you got what you wanted out of that book, or if perhaps you didn't, and maybe you need to look elsewhere for that thing instead. Being selective with not just the books we read, but the parts within them helps keep us interested and engaged and feel like we're making progress with our reading by not simply being stuck on the same tome forever. Here's an opinion you might find surprising. You don't actually have to enjoy reading to be an accomplished reader. Now, I love reading fiction. I've consumed hundreds of books in that genre up to this point in my life. But with non-fiction, I'm not so sure. I still don't quite know how much I actually enjoy the process of reading, or if I just appreciate knowing what reading gives me in terms of an education and exposure to competent writing and thinking that I can learn from. More often than not, when reading nonfiction, I'd rather be doing something else. And this could in part be just for me because reading so much fiction has made nonfiction as a reading activity so much duller in comparison. But the point still stands. It's fine if you don't particularly enjoy reading, but you enjoy what reading gives you. Not feeling thrilled or excited by the prospect doesn't mean that you can't do it, or that there's something wrong with you, or that it precludes you from being a reader. Of course, much of what we like or disapprove of is very much a matter of framing. So if reading is to you something that you're not sure that you enjoy, like I find myself thinking sometimes, I would still suggest that whenever possible, you try to frame that reading in as positive as light as you can, using whatever means you have to. Now, everyone that doesn't have a Kindle is incontrovertibly convinced that a Kindle isn't right for them and that paperback is a better option, right up until they get a Kindle. Honestly, this is purely a matter of preference. Because I read both fiction and non-fiction, I like to keep my genres separated in terms of the medium by which I read them. So for example, I like to read my fiction on my Kindle for a few reasons. Firstly, because it's very convenient, it's much better for nighttime reading, and I go through so many fiction books that it'd just be impossible to keep them all with me everywhere. And in contrast, I like to keep my non-fiction as paperback. Give either a go. I think, generally speaking, Kindle is probably the better option and far more convenient, but I do very much enjoy having a library of paperbacks that I can look at and reminisce on. We also have audiobooks now. They're another great option that allow you to absorb a book while doing other activities and it can feel less mentally tiring than the act of reading itself. However, it is worth recognizing that listening to an audiobook while doing other activities or tasks, say while being at a gym or going on a hike or doing some washing up or something, does mean that you are likely to lose a bit of focus and attention, probably won't absorb quite as much of that book as you would have if you'd sat there reading. But really, it's all just a matter of preference. Just experiment and see what works best for you. I think a common misconception that floats around is that you should only read one book at a time, because otherwise you'll be overloaded and lose track of things. You can't properly pay attention to both at the same time. But I don't think that's necessarily true. Being stuck on the same book for however long that takes without any variety can make that read feel stale. Sometimes it's good to have a bit of diversity and give one topic a break while perusing another. I'm currently reading a few things at the moment. For example, The Neuroscience of Love, A New Guide to Sex in the 21st Century, How the Pill Changes Everything, Essays in Love. Now, to be honest, this is probably too many things, but I find my curiosity constantly wavering between topics, so having a few on the go gives me options and keeps me stimulated. But in a case like this, I would suggest that you don't flit between them too often. Make sure you make a decent amount of progress on one before moving on to the next, and don't leave too much time between leaving and returning to that book, so that again, that narrative that I was talking about remains consolidated and doesn't fade and disappear. I hope this helped. I honestly made this video just as much for myself as for all of you. I'm finding it harder and harder to make reading a part of my routine, what with everything else going on in life, and just a general attention deficit that we're all suffering from, which is particularly troublesome when your work requires you to read. As you'll have noticed, these weren't really quick tips and tools how to read the line faster, follow your finger, don't always just look in the middle of the page, or any of these hacks that people promote. But again, I don't think they really work, and I think they suck the soul out of reading in a sense. I think what I was talking about is more intrinsic, practical approaches in a more holistic manner that rely on the underlying way we work, how we learn, how our brains work, and thus the best way to productively consume something like a book without bastardizing the whole process too much. As always, let me know if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more. Thanks.